So we have a number of different ways in which we can approach this concept of truth. It's actually a very interesting concept when you delve into it deeply and you view the idea historically. How does truth develop over time? That's where it gets interesting, and contemporary philosophers will lean in the direction of a pragmatic or a coherentist view of truth. And they thought they could define knowledge as true justified belief, and Gettier comes along and provides a counterexample whereby the justification one thinks they have is not really appropriate to the proposition, and therefore we can have a counterexample where we have knowledge that is true, it is believed, and it is justified, but it doesn't constitute knowledge. That's the Gettier counterexample. Actually, if you really want to understand what knowledge is, many would argue this is the philosophical approach that is limited by what we call armchair philosophy. And that's where a philosopher tries to do it just by using logic or conceptual analysis. Many will argue that that's a problem. If we really want to understand what we're talking about, you need to get the heck out of your chair, and you need to watch people who are involved in the practice. And when we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about science. And you don't learn how science is done from your office. You have to study what scientists do. And once you look at what scientists do, you find that it's all messed up. A lot of them are trying to make money, and it's about ego, yet we still end up generating knowledge. So it's a fascinating study. And contemporary epistemology has come to take on this focus, whereby we are essentially attempting to turn science on itself and empirically study the way scientists do their thing. And one of the most really blow your mind kind of book, I recommend this, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. Actually, I'll give you the conclusion of it. You don't even have to read the whole thing. But I will tell you, it's a great book to read. It's extremely clear and short. And the message just is really powerful from a philosophical perspective. The traditional view of scientific development was that the scientists in ancient Greece lay down a few blocks. Then along comes the Renaissance, and they put a little more on top of it. And then the modern era comes along, we start working on the edifice up top here, Wrong. Wrong. That's the assumption Kuhn had going into his study. And what Kuhn found is that's not the way it works, where we incrementally build on what went before. What actually happens is that somebody lays out a view, a paradigm, Kuhn calls them. And that paradigm ends up dominating for a period of time. Maybe 1, maybe 5 centuries. Maybe a century, 3, 4, depends. That paradigm guides further research. It guides our thinking when we're looking at things and observing them. However, when Newton comes along, he takes what Aristotle did and wipes it away and begins fresh with all new assumptions and a whole new paradigm. And so he's not building on what went before. He's wiping away what went before and laying out a new paradigm. And then Einstein comes along and takes what Newton did and wipes it away. Starts with a whole new view. Now, many will tell you that the view that Einstein develops is consistent with Newton's view in all those areas where we can perceive things happening. So it's generally the same. However, the way you get there is entirely different. We're viewing space and time as being one, and they're shrinking around heavy objects. So what Kuhn came to find is that knowledge is not developed incrementally. And there's actually an interesting connection between the tempo and the development of knowledge and the tempo and the development of physical structures according to evolution. There's this concept called punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium. And a couple scientists in the 70s, Stephen Jay Gould and another partner came up with this idea of punctuated equilibrium. And what they found is that the fossil record does not develop incrementally, where structures, slowly got legs, then we stand erect. No, the structure is there, stays the same for a long period of time, and then you have a short period of disruptive change, whereby suddenly, boom, an opposing thumb comes along and it spreads really fast. So the changes take place really fast, and there's long periods of no change whatsoever in the fossil record. Well, Kuhn is laying out a similar tempo in the development of scientific knowledge. These paradigms last for a long time, and then Einstein comes. And in a span of 10 years, we have this revolution where there's a flip to this new paradigm. And so the process by which knowledge is developed from Kuhn's perspective is extremely different, and we no longer have the ability to say we're getting closer to the truth there, because every time we point, it's from the perspective of some paradigm. And he also had this view that these paradigms not only affect the way you think, but these paradigms affect the way you see. They affect what you see. And he gives this experiment. So I have a deck of cards, and I'm going to show them to you one at a time. All right? Now, without telling you, I've placed in this deck a red 3 of spades. A red 3 of spades. 3 of spades is supposed to be black. I'm going to show him the red 3 of spades without telling him. And what is he going to call it?
3 hearts.
Correct. That's what he's expecting. He's going to see it within that framework. He's not going to know there's an anomalous card in the deck. So he's going to see it as the closest one, 3 of hearts. So now I tell you, there's an anomalous card in the deck. Watch out. We do it again, and what does he see the red 3 of spades as? He now sees it as an anomalous card. Now, Kuhn uses that experiment to explain how scientists, after the Copernican revolution, when we go from, we thought that the Earth was at the center, now we think that the sun is at the center and the Earth flies around like that. Well, after the Copernican revolution, scientists discovered a number of planets orbiting the sun. And Kuhn makes the argument that just like when I tell you there's an anomalous card in the deck, all the scientists were told, hey, they're orbiting out there. So now when they look out and they see the same thing, they interpret it differently. We're seeing the world differently because of these paradigms. We're seeing the world differently because of these paradigms. Now this is revolutionary. Freak philosophers out.
If you were a scientist and you assumed something before you was true, even if you are starting a brand new thing, if you assume something before you is true, then you are carrying over the last paradigm, as long as you believe that is true.
Here's the thing. Most scientists will say there's no way to not do that.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And so you're always going to be viewing things from the perspective of a paradigm. You're absolutely right.
In order to explain Einstein, you have to reference Newton.
Correct. 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 Now, for Kuhn, there's always the possibility that you're going to revise the paradigm that we're in right now and come up with this new way of explaining things that is more compelling than all those that came before.
It's the same idea behind models. It's a tool. And as soon as this model isn't working to explain Mother Nature, you drop that tool and go get a Phillips head screwdriver. Same thing.
That smells like a pragmatic approach. And I completely agree with you that, in fact, one might argue that if the universe is infinite, as many cosmologists now believe, then there is no complete view of nature, complete comprehensive explanation of nature. Moreover, we got some important things to work on. Apparently, climate change is an issue, and thus there's a lot of scientific knowledge that would help us deal with these real problems staring us right in the face. And going out and trying to figure out the acceleration of gravity on the dark side of the moon, why don't we figure out how to do solar power? You know? So there is a sense in which once you recognize that it's infinite and there's no complete picture, then the pragmatic view, well, why don't we figure it out so we can do more figuring out in the future?
Like, if they would actually look at the universe from a pragmatic view, like even geology, there's a sub-theory being formed right now. It's called the expanding Earth theory, and we accept that as fact for other planets. That's how some planets die. The inside starts to disperse, and it gets slightly bigger, and the rotation stops. And we accept that as truth for every other planet, but not ours.
Because we don't
Not
want
ours,
it.
of course not. No. That happened to Mars. It's not going to happen to us. What are you talking about? We have tectonic plates. We're different. And
We've got issues about that.
yeah. So even at, like, if you observe the universe, which is supposed to pinpoint things for yourself, they fail to do that last step, in which looking up there is supposed to help things you do here.
Great point. Great point. And I will tell you, as you mentioned, that every time you kind of phrase questions in science, you're coming from a particular paradigm. Well, one of the paradigms that human scientists are definitely in is an anthropocentric paradigm, where humans are better than anything else on the planet. And so you'll often have these documentaries, you know, they're studying other animals. Well, how is the human so much superior than the monkey? You know, where is that point where we left what they're doing and we're doing something different? You know, what distinguishes? And, you know, for many scientists, there isn't one. We're one of these animals. And we do stupid stuff all the time, you know. But they're always looking for what distinguishes us from them, you know.
But there is a major distinction, like such as intuition.
Oh, but sorry.
Intuition. Intuition is the distinction?
I mean, at least I believe so.
Well,
Like if
it
you give,
excuse me?
go ahead.
It used to be that we were the only ones who made tools. And then they found that the chimps stick limbs into the thing and they lick the ants off. So tools don't work. It used to be that we were the only animal that used language. And it's funny, because in order to determine whether an animal uses language, our first attempt was to teach a chimpanzee American Sign Language. Think of how ironic that is. They have to speak our language for us to determine that they're communicating. Now, I would say that a less prejudiced approach would be this one scientist who is studying these elephants, and she has buried all these microphones in the forest where they live, and special microphones because apparently these elephants, late at night, they communicate on these low, very white registers, and apparently they're talking so deep that you got to speed up the tape so that human beings can actually hear it. And so she's trying to hear how these elephants are communicating to each other and understanding their language. Instead of trying to teach elephants American Sign Language, we try to understand how they communicate. But you know, that's where those prejudices are in. How do we test whether an animal can communicate? Let's get them to speak our language. And now with dolphins, they're trying to figure out the squeaks. And they now know that squeaks are not random. They can chart them out, and some occur more than others. And they have squeaks that they think are names.
They found squeaks that are similar from when our sonars go near their schools, I believe. Schools, and when they're not around, that they're actually warning, hey, submarine's coming. Squeak, 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 whatever. But then, consciousness is relative to the person who has the consciousness.
Yes.
How do I know that you actually exist?
Correct.
It goes on a deeper level. I am conscious of whatever's around me, but there's no way for me to prove any of those truths that his consciousness is the same as my consciousness.
True.
I would have to be in his consciousness, which is impossible, so the parameters can never fit.
Correct. However, we are using information theory to better understand how these dolphins communicate. And this one scientist demonstrates that if I have a book full of gibberish, just in random order, and I chart out the use of the words, it's going to be a straight line essentially.
Yeah.
You know, you use all the words essentially about the same. But if we read Moby Dick, it ain't like that.
No.
Some words are used much more than others. The articles get used a lot, and you have this diagonal line. And that shows that real information is being communicated. So, they put the tape on the dolphins with their squeaks, they chart out the different squeaks, they chart them out, and you got a diagonal line. So what you know is that there is some real information being communicated here that wouldn't be in just random gibberish. Now, I don't know what they're saying, and we don't know what is in the mind, you know. Moreover, you know, how do dolphins see? Sonar, right? So they see using sound. You know, it's so different than the way we are. So if a dolphin sees a gorgeous woman, I could send you a picture of that gorgeous woman exactly like you. Isn't she hot? Look at this, you know. Because we would see using, I don't know, it's a different thing. You know, the point is it would be a different thing. However, they've had a big brain. They've had it for a long, long time. And so if we're doing cartoons about cars and all that stuff, we need to do a cartoon about dolphins, anthropomorphic dolphins. Have they done one yet?
I'm not sure.
Disney's working on that, for sure. Absolutely.
Maybe.
Definitely working on that. Interesting subject in philosophy, knowledge, the way it grows, epistemology is a fascinating subject. And also, the philosophy of science is a fascinating subject to learn more about. One of the reasons why I enjoy reading stuff in the philosophy of science is that the arguments in this subject area are usually based on real events in the history of science. So you end up learning about the history of science when you read an article on the philosophy of sciences. Quite nice. All right, value judgments. Value judgments are unique. Claims we use to say that something is good or bad in some way. For example, music. For some, oh, that's a hot song. Somebody else say different value judgment and moral judgments. We're going to say that that kind of behavior is good, that kind of behavior is bad. In many cases, value judgments are going to be relative to the individual, relative to the culture, relative to the time. Same-sex marriage back in the 60s. No, not really something that people were wild about. In fact, interracial marriage back then was a big issue. Now, isn't the new mayor of New York married to yeah? So, you know, now it's no problems there. The times have indeed changed. So moral values can often be interpreted as being relative. In some serious cases, many will argue moral judgments are not relative. We like to say that, you know, murdering innocent people is bad. Child abuse is bad. However, we can disagree on what constitutes child abuse. I had a student, I had a friend, it sounds like a apocryphal story. I had a colleague of mine had a student in his composition class, and she was unable to do the assignment. He had assigned free writing, where you go home and just write freely. And this student said that she could not do the assignment because she was raised that women should think practically, that women shouldn't think freely. They think practically about what to get on the clothesline, what kind of food to get on the table for dinner. Women do not think freely. And she believed that so much that she felt that she could not complete this assignment of free writing. Now, to touch a child to abuse one. And I think that might constitute a form of abuse. Telling a young woman that she's not supposed to think freely. I find that to be disgusting. And yet, it still occurs. Isn't that amazing? It still occurs. And it is interesting that the woman's issue was a surprising big applause line in the State of the Union address. And women are coming to the forefront politically. In fact, I'm thinking about the Republicans with their women problems and having a woman to give the main response. Very maternal, you might say, in the living room with mom. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about Hillary. It's all mine. What do you think? Do you think, she's waiting, and women are becoming a big issue now? All she needs is a few more Republicans to start talking about women's issues. Come on, please, go ahead. Give them the mic. Go ahead, give them the mic. Ask them about the libido thing. Because the more that women become central politically, it seems like it would help Hillary's case. I don't know. Maybe people are tired of the Clintons. Value judgments, sometimes they're relative, sometimes they are not. In some cases, we do not know what it would mean for a claim to be true. For example, consider this claim. The color blue weighs more than 4 pounds. Yeah, man, absolutely. This isn't a legitimate claim. It is not legitimate. It's contradictory. And so you can't have claims like this in an argument. You're going to run into problems. So we close the chapter considering a few examples of human insanity that could benefit from a little bit of critical thinking. And, to be honest, I should put some stupid things that I do too. We're all in this. We're all in this together. If you're honest, you're in this together. And by the way, have you ever read something you wrote 2 years ago? Yeah. So that's when you know that you're developing, when that makes you want to vomit. So let's consider some great ideas. Ethanol, yeah, man. So the U.S. Senate passed an energy bill that mandates the production of 36 billion gallons of ethanol by 2022. We thought this was going to do a number of things. First, we're going to reduce our carbon emissions. Secondly, we're going to become less dependent upon foreign oil from the Saudis. We're going to start growing this fuel. I think we're doing it for corn initially. And we thought this was a good idea, and we were wrong. We were wrong. Ethanol doesn't burn cleaner than many forms of gasoline. So it really doesn't help in reducing emissions. But worse than that, they were thinking of using ethanol from corn. And that's a problem. Because the way our food industry is set up right now, we use corn to grow everything. We feed corn to chickens. We feed corn to pigs. We feed corn to cows. So if the price of corn goes up, the price of barbecue, hamburger, pork, food in general goes up. In fact, corn is made into this corn syrup, and then it gets into everything. And I defy you to find something in the supermarket that does not have that corn syrup in there, from applesauce to all these kinds of things. So corn, if you increase the price of corn, it ends up increasing the price of all of these foods. And that, by the way, is a problem in and of itself. We need to have cows grass-fed. We're feeding them corn because we got them in these industrial farming things and they only have a pen. And they were, you know, they're made to eat grass. And the problem is they can't do that in industrial